So the mind is really the subjective part of one of the brain's functions, and the individual's sense of who they are, where they fit in, what they're doing, and we know that that has a lot to do with well-being. Just for example, an entity as fuzzy as morale. An entity as fuzzy as feeling cared for and supported really have important contributions to make to the chance of a biologically targeted treatment working. And I think when we move beyond the Descartesian sense of the mind being separate from the brain, and we think of these as integrated entities, just different ways of looking at complex phenomena, that it's certainly plausible that different states of mind can be achieved by looking at different interventions that target brain function. So why don't we go on ahead to the next slide? And I just wanted to start with a little summary of some of the things that we can call upon over and above prescribing an antidepressant or prescribing a TMS. And we have ample evidence that exercise has a measurable antidepressant effect. In some studies, it's comparable over 8 weeks to the effects of an SSRI. Perhaps this is not as true for people who have treatment-resistant depression, but still, basically all mammals feel better, function better when they have the opportunity to do some species-specific movement and exercise, and most human beings feel better when their day-to-day life includes some sort of regular aerobic exercise, even on the order of a 10 or 15-minute brisk walk daily. Mindfulness really reflects the process of kind of rising above or getting past, giving up on the intrusive, ruminative kind of worries, and just to let yourself get above it. And it is a skill, and not everybody can learn to do it, but many people can. And particularly if intrusive ruminations and the inability to relax complicate your recovery, learning to do some mindfulness exercises can make a difference. Social connectedness really refers to the fact that spending time with people that you like and who care about you enhances well-being. And folks with more social support have a better chance of recovering. There's no doubt about that. But depression as an entity tends to distance us from our social connections. We turn down invitations. We don't go out. And so helping the person systematically re-engage can complement antidepressant interventions. Not all of our antidepressants are particularly good for sleep, and some actually have some sleep disruptive effects, and we know that the depth and quality of sleep has a lot to do with the brain's restoration and subsequent resilience. And so targeting the quality of sleep and ensuring that our patients are able to get a better night's sleep and have that restfulness can make a big difference. Conventional psychotherapy obviously has a role. Some of the modern depression-focused psychotherapies include these various ingredients as explicit parts of them. But even when they don't, the engagement, the sense of being cared for and cared about, and participating in a collaborative process that's aimed towards improving one's life, not making the same mistakes, learning to do things differently is a fundamental, valuable thing. In our controlled studies, the addition of psychotherapy to pharmacotherapy reliably adds about 10 or 15% to the chances of success for standard antidepressant treatments. A more global entity, spirituality here, I think it doesn't mean exactly being religious, because people can be secular humanists and have a very strong sense that goodness is important, and the ability to connect. It really does have to do with part of being part of a larger whole, that there is a bigger picture out there, and it does appear that our species is so social and connected and entwined, that the notion that we are part of something bigger, and that something bigger is part of what is good about life. I think having that as a compass or a pointer in life is a great thing. And then something that ebbs and flows in its popularity, that is experiencing a renaissance now, is the notion that you are what you eat, or at least how you feel is somewhat influenced by what you eat. And of course, in a time of epidemic obesity in the United States, we now know that adipose tissue is cytokine generating, that people who are markedly overweight have less chance of responding to conventional treatments of depression, and the very notion that paying attention to a balancing diet and improving nutrition and moving towards a healthier weight can increase chances for success. So there's some evidence, in fact, that these kinds of interventions improve brain function. And so there has been a study that looked at the volume of the hippocampus. And of course, the hippocampus is a key area linked to the limbic system, where we initiate the storage and retrieval of memories, and also a key way station for the suppression of abnormal or extended stress response. And so obviously, the plumper your hippocampus, the better you can baffle the stress response, and perhaps the better to be able to manage retrieval of affective tied memories in a way that promotes problem solving. And indeed, there's been a study in which an exercise program was actually associated with some restoration of hippocampal volume, or perhaps another way of looking at it is to mitigate the consequences of sustained unremitting stress or depression on hippocampal volume.
Hey, Michael, if I might add, just before we go on, when you were introducing the 7 different wellness enhancing interventions for today's talk, when you talked about nutrition, one of the things you said, you commented on its anti-inflammatory impact. And I think that it's worth adding that we see the same thing with exercise. Not only does the data show that it improves cognition, it improves mood, but we also have the data to support exercise as a great anti-inflammatory strategy. Now, interestingly, and it was kind of like a trick question. Someone asked me once, is exercise anti-inflammatory or pro-inflammatory? And I'm thinking, well, of course the answer is anti-inflammatory. And I had a little bit of egg on my face, because when you really look at the data, about the first 4 hours after exercise, there's an increase in inflammation. But the very good news that increase in inflammation is the rest of the day, roughly, and this is just really a very broad stroke, 20 hours or so, we begin to see a systemic reduction in inflammation. So I love so many of these strategies that we're talking about, because they're not just good for mood improvement, but they're also showing great value as anti-inflammation.
Yeah, and I think the animal studies that have been done where animals are subjected to unresolvable stress, given access to whatever their species-specific preferred exercise might be, wheel running, for example, that the impact of stress is muffled. It's dampened by the animal having the opportunity to exercise or to move about in a healthy species-specific way. And I think these things have to do in part with counteracting the pro-inflammatory nature, because the animals that could exercise had higher BDF levels than the animals that didn't. And BDF is one of those muffling factors that can help us cope with sustained adversity. So our next slide talks about the combination of psychotherapy and pharmacotherapy. And look, I don't think this is the treatment of choice for everybody to have both options. There are many people with mild to moderate depressions who do quite well with focused psychotherapy away. There are many people with depression of various levels of severity who do quite well with pharmacotherapy alone. But for people with more difficult treatment histories, for people with more adversity in their past, and for people who just plain prefer the combination of the two, I think it really does make a nice difference. And when I say reliably adds 10 or 15% over and above one or the other below, I'll just remind you that in all of our placebo-controlled studies, the active elements of these treatments only convey about 10 to 20% over and above placebo expectancy. So you really are seeing kind of the maximum possible additive benefit when you use these together in patients with treatment resistance and patients with trauma history and so forth. So, Saundra, is there a kind of psychotherapy that you prefer most at this point in your career?
You know, it's interesting that there's so many options now and so many newer things sort of coming available to us, but I'm sort of an old school trained CBT person, and that still seems to be the foundation of the work I do. But 10 years ago, when I got trained in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, it was this beautiful marriage between my training and this new world that I had learned about called mindfulness meditation. And interestingly, Michael, there's a group out of UK. I think it is a Dr. Robert Watkins, and I apologize that I cannot remember the academic affiliation, but they just 2 years ago published their manualized program that's called rumination focused CBT. So they've taken the foundational concepts of CBT and integrated and interwoven education, actual practices specific to ruminative thinking. And I have to say their data is extremely positive. So from a therapy standpoint, I am much more directive. I like manual-based approaches. So CBT combined with mindfulness-based cognitive therapy or with rumination-focused CBT, that probably is, those are my best, most favored interventions.
Well, having spent most of my career working depression or depression-prone patients, I have to agree. I prefer action-oriented interventions and a more active therapeutic style also. But I know that some folks find that awkward and hard to engage in. And I think for them, interpersonal psychotherapy offers a softer, gentler, but also in its own way, action-oriented approach to help people kind of begin to get their hands around the contextual circumstances that they've become depressed in and come to some understanding and then begin to make a plan about how the next part of their life can be lived differently. But again, getting back to the false Descartesian dichotomy of mind and brain, psychotherapy and pharmacotherapy have overlapping and different effects on brain function. And here we see the results of one classic study in which patients either treated with CBT or with antidepressants. And SSRIs, I believe, in this study showed some of the same changes with effective treatment and some different changes. I think importantly, as you might guess, monoamine targeted antidepressants initiate their effects at the brainstem. So there's a treatment that begins below the cortex, and CBT and related treatments really do begin their intervention at the prefrontal cortex and involve improving the ability to exert informational or cognitive control over brainstem processes. And so psychotherapy does seem to initiate its action from above and shows greater changes in that direction.